Hello friends, welcome back to Spiritism for All, and today we continue to study the book Behind the Scenes of Obsession. The chapter is The Blessed Illness. The spiritual author is Manoel Philomeno de Miranda, and the medium is Divaldo Pereira Franco. It has passed a month since Mr. Mateus had returned home after the crisis that had led him unconscious to the emergency room, victim of a cerebral embolism. The spiritual atmosphere in the Soares residence was significantly better. There was even an atmosphere of unusual peace in that home, which had been long shaken by storms of various kinds. Mariana's father, affectionately assisted by his wife and daughters, showed signs of comforting organic recovery. He was already able to speak with less effort, and the counseling lessons of Spiritism, to which he had become gradually accustomed, through the reading of the Gospel according to Spiritism, performed by his ex-obsessed daughter. The lessons could penetrate him deeply, making him reformulate concepts and modify intimate dispositions. The police chief, who was still waiting to hear the victim's testimony against Mr. Marcondes Pereira, the aggressor, visited the patient to accept the criminal complaint against the disaffected, and, to the general surprise, Mr. Mateus changed his intentions about the previous accusations. He asked that everything should be forgotten, considering his own frivolity, which caused the event, since he did not intend to present any accusation. The seed of the Redeemer Gospel was already germinating in his spiritual terrain, which used to be unproductive. The person in charge of keeping the order left grateful and equally happy with Mr. Mateus' decision, considering, after all, that the damage was not of great importance and that everything would be regularized over time. Days later, accompanied by the same police officer, the citizen Marcondes came to visit his victim and asked for excuses, considering the fact that they had known each other for a long time, despite the little spiritual affinity existing between them. Let the mournful incidents that could have led to the disgrace of two heads of family and the consequent misfortune of their descendants be forgotten. That would serve them both as a precious lesson. It was with this good news that we got together for the ordinary works of this obsession, after hearing them from the lips of Dona Rosa and Amália, who, having calmed down the difficulties at home, resumed to the duties of spiritual worship and charity to the discarnate. The rescue operations were at the end, when Saturnino, incorporating the medium Moraes, using his psychophony, wove some considerations around the disobsession labors related to the Soares family. Our words today, he spoke with an inflection of great tenderness and kindness, as was usual for him, are addressed to Miss Rosa, whose example of resignation moves us and congratulates us. Invited to the rescue in a mighty river of sufferings, the dear sister of ours has known how to honor the trust of the Lord. From an early age, she requested the blessing of personal renunciation, gathering old commitments in her home that got increasingly complicated, and accepted the task of toil tirelessly until the end of the task, without discouragement or rebellion. It's fair that the salary be awarded to her for her fidelity to the rightly performed duty. And the salary of the devoted servant is the hope of better hours, with the peace of every moment, for the continuation of the enterprise of inner light to which she is nobly bound. And wishing perhaps to demonstrate the elevation of the merits of Amalia's mother, he added, "We had in our hands the dilemma of how to lead with Mr. Mateus, in view of the pains that waited on his home and his irreverent disloyalty to the duties spontaneously assumed at the family altar." Soon after the regrettable incident that he deserved, we gathered those who took responsibility for helping Mariana and also her family to examine the course of future tasks in her home, reaching to the conclusion that the most effective remedy to be applied to our brother would be the long stay in bed, so that the limitation of strength and the constraint of the illness could awaken his tormented spirit to the vital issues of reincarnation and immortality. We know from experience and observation that the most stubborn and inveterate opponents of reason, wisdom, spiritual feelings modify their concepts. Soon they face perspectives of a closer discarnation, and, although not believing in the continuation of life as they make us believe, they plead this desperate asking for more time to retrace their paths and be better prepared to die. Thus we concluded that the best choice was the hypothesis of keeping him in bed, depending on the hands of his family, instead of the spectacular and irreversible fall in the cliff of delinquency to which he was marching under the powerful command of insensitive enemies with whom he had been magnetized for a long time. Thus, after the delirium in the friction with Martha, equally disturbed, we resorted to providential help, applying magnetic resources that released the air bubble that lodged in a special circuit of the brain, generating the embolism that affected him. The divine benefactor has resources and specialized therapy for all problems and illnesses and pain, which is now his teacher. Let me read again. The divine benefactor has resources and specialized therapy for all problems and illnesses and pain, which is now his teacher and gentle mother, also opens for him the doors of family understanding and peace at home, helping him to discover the new world of the spirit for one's own happiness. For his own happiness. He got silent for a few moments and then went on. Certainly, there is still a lot more to be done. He himself will have to untie countless bonds to which he has let himself be trapped in the past. Inclined, however, to more prudent and valuable observations, he will be able to redo much of the damage previously generated, initiating new commitments for himself. His executioners settle down at the crossroads of the dark plots and wait for an opportunity. Some besiege him during the moments of liberation through sleep, since his mind is strongly fascinated by debauchery, along whose path he took in the past, obviously. He freely tunes in with his former associates and receives abundant negative suggestion from them and high doses of deleterious energy, returning to the physical body depressed, homesick, rebellious. The providential and inspired interference of Mariana, when she volunteered to read the Gospel at her bedside, slowly modifies his mental panels, allowing him to shift the center of interest, previously fixed in the game, to the elevation of duties, making him to consider the loss of time and the lack of value of his aspirations, in view of the carnal life that is extinguishing with illness, age, accident. Unable to speak with the desirable clarity, he cannot react or discuss the Spiritist team, and semi-immobilized, he feels constrained to reflect over the concepts heard. The disordered reasoning centers slowly calm down, imposing new intimate reflections over the beauties of reincarnation, hitherto unnoticed. At the same time, the union of the family around high studies and salutary meditation garners ennobled sympathies from the spiritual world, and the domestic stronghold becomes a haven of refreshment for the discarnate handlers fond of good and, why not say, a living school for learning, in which the lessons are lives that harmonize around the excellency of Jesus' life. In the branches of the tree of faith, the donations of love and charity are already bearing fruit, transformed into healthy and productive sap. When the benefactor fell silent, there was a saturation of peace and general joy, which seemed to be carried by invisible and powerful hands present there. He also spoke generously and calmly to a few other companions when the evening's work was then ended. At the suggestion of Saturnino himself, directly to Petitinga, made earlier, and overcoming countless difficulties, we proceeded to a visit to the leprosy hospital in the Quintas neighborhood, to try some assistance for Ana Maria, the tormented and the undistinguished former bride of brother Theophrastus. Promptly attended by a nurse on duty, and with the authorization document from the Public Health Service, we went through several dependencies of the house until we located the young woman whose presence make us evoke, as in a good and pleasant dream, the memory of the previous visit that we had made to that haven of suffering in spirit, under the sure guidance of Brother Glaucus. The girl, singularly disheveled, with some signs of purple on her face and on the earlobes, moved us by the sadness that she reflected in her anguished eyes and melancholy face. Petitinga, the bearer of the noble persuasion, managed to maintain a light conversation with her, framing her in the halo of his warm, engaging friendliness. Sensitive poet, he spoke to her lightly of Christ Jesus and his cures. He motivated her to health, to hope, as well to the two companions who shared his cramped cell, almost a nauseating and infected dungeon, promising to return whenever allowed us the commitments. At that time, the sanitary measures preventing contact with Hansen's evil carriers were very strict, although those patients lived in almost total abandonment, using medicines such as alufan, a preparation of keratin, or chalmuzan, made with chamugra oil ethyl esters. Medical therapies involving the application of heat sulfa drugs. Experiences around the world in which there were leprosy hospitals had not yet surpassed that therapy, with some slight variations without great significance. Attempts to cure one another were innocuous and with desperate results. Patients, however, were often hunted like animals, and in some countries they were led to the leprosy hospitals chained with guns glued to the back of their necks. In underdeveloped places they lived as in biblical times, begging, with their face half covered, considered wild and accursed, raged, sleeping in the woods or on the rocks near the path where they used to beg. So it was very difficult to get permission for regular visits to inpatients. The specter of illness was so powerfully inculcated in all minds, and the danger of contagion so strongly pervasive, that we ourselves felt the embarrassment arising from ignorance. Petitinga, however, managed to get the authorization, using multiple friendships, and began to visit Ana Maria again and again, offering her, at the first opportunity, a copy of the Gospel according to Spiritism, telling her that there, in that fountain of light and living water, she would find peace and comfort. An admirable phenomenon also occurred during our visits, and while we were talking Saturnino in spirit, using our ectoplasmic forces, applied healthy resources to the patient and her companions, continuing the assistance spiritually in the following days. Her former obsessor had been displayed since the first visit we made with our brother Theophrastus, and was taken shortly after by the brother Glaucus and Ambrosio to a hospital specialized in the spiritual sphere for further treatment. In this way, the sadness and melancholy gradually disappeared from the patient, and the stains of fluid intoxication also faded away until they disappeared completely. Due to Petitinga's insistence, 6 months after our first visit, the patient was submitted to a rigorous examination and considered cured. Now we knew that her disease was a simulacrum disease caused by the evil fluids of her obsessor, who had managed to take her to that leprosy hospital to culminate in the suggestion of nefarious suicide, which would enfold her in the strong webs of disgrace, falling into his hateful claws for the long process of spiritual vampire behavior, of long course in the painful regions of the unhappy spheres. Thanks to Petitinga's interference, he managed to locate his goddaughter in the house of a Spiritist family who, although they knew where she came from, did not refuse the charitable hand aimed at her full recovery. The family, informed of the drama of the obsession that the young woman had suffered, which had motivated her entry into that material purge, and aware of the known risk of contagion, due to the non-existence of the disease, received the girl who began to experience a new life, committed, however, to report regularly every 6 months to the leprosy hospital for the necessary medical checks. While this was happening, Martha, recently freed from the old concepts that had been immersed in the most basic superstition, sought to maintain her firm resolve to persevere in the ideas of Spiritism. Thanks, however, to the long psychic contact with very gross entities, which had created a certain interdependence between the incautious sensitive and her guests, she began to experience perfectly understandable imbalances. As a seeing medium with good possibilities of recording and perception, who, although outraged by use, captured the message of the discarnate, began to suffer their nefarious siege, which she deserved to her own frivolity. She was a seeing medium. We can call it clairvoyance medium, or a medium that can see the double C. We call double C. She can see with her eyes, but she can see with her perispiritual eyes. So she sees both worlds, the material world and the spiritual world. The simple change of climate imposes on the organism the necessary adaptation. Thus, the alteration of the psychosphere is also accompanied by a very great effort to elaborate other intimate conditions and make the convenient tuning. Although the effort to link to renovating ideals via the old threatening entities, mocking their purposes and causing unjustifiable fears, which usually generates the belief that people who abandon such commitments suffer until discarnation the harassment of old cronies. It's quite understandable that such very deep bonds cannot be broken simply with an attitude. It's necessary to build new bonds and organize suitable resistance. Possessing, however, a lot of willpower, she began to study Spiritism with interest, educating herself in its precious lessons, through which she stored arguments for her own use, gathering unlimited trust in divine help. She underwent an affectionate treatment of magnet healing blesses applied by trained and educated mediums, becoming an active member of the doctrinal works in which the comforting lessons of renewed faith penetrated her, being finally invited to act in mediumistic experiences and slowly becoming a disciplined instrument by whose mediumship several of several of the members of her previous beliefs received the enlightening light of reason, giving up the cherished purposes and starting a new trajectory, as if they were reborn to true life. The other daughters of the Soares family, without any major problems, faced with such moving examples, began to effectively cooperate in the home, which was transformed into a living school of faith under the exuberant lights of the counseling Spiritism. Here the comment we draw the reader's attention to what clarifies Allan Kardec in the Spiritist book, International Spiritist Council, 3rd edition, 2nd part, chapter 9, questions 551, 552, and 555. 51. Can evil individuals, with the aid of evil spirits to whom they are devoted, cause harm to their neighbor? No, God would not permit it. That's the answer. 552. What is to be the thought? What is to be What is to be thought of the belief that certain individuals can cast spells? Answer. Some persons possess a very strong magnetic power, which they may use for evil if their own spirit is evil. In that case, they could be aided by other evil spirits, but do not believe in the fake magical power that exists only in the imagination of superstitious people who are ignorant of the true laws of nature. The events they cite are natural events, poorly observed and above all poorly understood. 555. What are sorcerers? Answer. When they are of good faith, those whom you call sorcerers are persons who possess certain faculties such as magnetic power or second sight. Second sight is the name of the mediumship that I was talking before, as a double sight. Second sight is the view through the eyes of the perispirit, the view of the spiritual world. Okay? Some mediums have this. It's called second sight. Since some ones call it clairvoyance too. Since they do things that you do not comprehend, you suppose them to be endowed with supernatural power. Haven't you learned individuals often being mistaken for sorcerers in the eyes of the ignorant? Spiritism and magnetism give us the key to an infinite number of phenomena about which ignorance has woven many fables and in which the facts have been greatly exaggerated by the imagination. A clear knowledge of these two sciences, which are actually but one, showing the reality of things and their true cause, is the best protection against superstitious ideas, because they reveal that is what's possible and what's impossible, what is within the laws of nature and what's no more than a foolish belief. That's a note from the spiritual author. Thank you very much for watching us. The next chapter is Redemptive Commitments. Thank you very much for watching us. If you like this video, please leave us a like, share with your friends, leave us your comments, and please subscribe to help us to grow. Thank you very much.